Hello everyone, today I thought I would cover using Sass in your Rails applications. This is going to be a pretty quick video. Overall, the command should take you maybe, I don't know, a minute or two to set up, but I did want to cover it just in case it's something you're not familiar with. I saw a Reddit comment the other day, or Reddit post maybe, I don't know, that was asking about how to use like Sass and ESBuild, so I thought I'd cover it real quick because it's one of the few combinations I haven't really touched on here. Now, if you're not familiar, when you run a Rails new command, you have a couple different options to pass in. One is going to be for your CSS processor, and the other one's going to be for your JavaScript processor. So for JavaScript, you have the options for import maps, which are mega cringe and ship with Rails by default, Webpack, which you probably don't want to use either, ESBuild, which you'll probably want to use, and Rollup, which everyone forgets exists. So in this case, we're going to be using ESBuild. And we're going to be using a CSS flag. Instead of using Bootstrap like we normally do, or Tailwind, which we've covered before, we're going to be using the Sass version of it. So all we really have to do is type Rails new, name the project. In my case, I'm going to name mine video. We'll then give it a -J of ESBuild and a -C of SASS. That will set up Sass and ESBuild for us. While all of this is running, I guess I can sort of talk about how this works. So in the case of CSS, it uses the CSS bundler gem, and in the case of JavaScript, it uses the JS bundler gem. And effectively what you're going to be doing is instead of running your Rails S command, you're going to be running a bin/dev command. The bin/dev command will give you some additional functionality depending on how you set it up. You can have things like TypeScript running in the background. You can have like hot reloading or anything else. And if I cd into the video real quick and we do a ll on our bin directory, you can see we have a couple different options here, including this dev. We'll go ahead and open this up in a VS Code instance. And we can take a look at what's in here. Now I do have to close out of all of these files, which are already created, which I don't need you to worry about, but it won't close out of them for some reason because VS Code wants to spoil the video. But if we come into here, we have our proc file, which is what that bin dev is going to be running. In this proc file, we have three different things. One is going to be for our web server. This is going to be your bin Rails. So this is your Rails S command. You're passing it a port. The JS command, which is going to be running your whatever your JS bundler is, and your CSS command, which is going to be running your Sass in this case. So where does all of this come from? Like, how does this work? Well, this comes from your Package.json effectively. Of course, the Rails command is self-explanatory. It's just running this Rails server command. But the yarn commands are just coming from your Package.json. Just like if you were running a regular yarn server, it would come out of your scripts. Or if you have like an NPM server, you have like npm run start. This would be your start. In this case, it's called build, and it runs this lengthy command right here. Now, the only thing we really have to change in here for, I think, the ES bundling is you do have the option if you want to run like the TypeScript. I guess I can cover that real quick. I think I have a window open somewhere. I think for TypeScript, the only thing you have to add is in your proc file a types section to run yarn ts-check. You then, of course, need the ts-check to be inside of your files. So in that case, you'd have to come into your package.json, you'd have your build CSS, and then you would need something like, and I'm pulling this out of a certain location in my body, a check-types, where you have something like whatever your tsc command is. So what is it? Let me see if I can find something on Google real quick. Okay, so yeah, what we have here is you would need something like this in here. So your tsc --project with a tsconfig.json, which you would have to create. So that would have to be in here, right? Like a new file, tsconfig.json. And then in here, you would have whatever you need. You would then need it to say no emit with a watch command, and then the preserve watch output, I think, according to this blog post right here, which I'll have a link to in the video description, this one's going to be for stopping the form and output from blowing up. So if you have all of that, you can also make this work for TypeScript. It really depends on how you want this to work. In that case, you'd have to have like application.ts here, and you would need to get rid of this public path assets right here, I believe, and then you'd have your TypeScript enabled. In this case, we're not going to be using it, so I'm going to backspace out of this, but the rest of this should work just fine. We'll get rid of the types in here, and then we'll just run a Rails G controller pages home to create a home page. We'll run a bin/dev instead of a Rails S to have this start up various different sockets here. So we have our 3 different processes. We have the Rails server, the yarn command, and the other yarn command. So all 3 of these run whenever you run your proc file, and they stop running when they stop the proc file. The tsconfig.json doesn't need to be here. That's why this is getting upset with us. So we'll run this command again, and hopefully now it stops being upsetty spaghetti with us, which it looks like it has. So we're going to go ahead and refresh. We have to set a root for the application. So we'll come into config and routes.rb. We'll change this get to a root and the slash to a hash. Then we can come up here to our app, our assets, our style sheets, our application.sass.scss. And then let's just go ahead and test this. We'll create a div with an ID of test, a div with an ID of case. And then in the test, we'll give this a color of red. And in the case, we'll give this a color of blue. Let's then come into our views, pages, and our home page. And in here, we'll do a div with an ID of test. We'll hit tab on that. This is the test div. And then we can do a div with an ID of case inside of this one. And then we'll say this is the case div. And then we would expect these to have different colors. And when we refresh, we can see that they both have those 2 colors, which is showing you that the Sass here is working. Now, of course, you can take this a step further if you'd like to. There's a whole bunch of various like sassy things you can do, including like importing other style sheets, etc. But in the case of the tsconfig, if you did decide to go with TypeScript, I can just cover that real quick. The only changes you're really going to have to make in here if you're using TypeScript, I think, are going to be you'll probably have to convert this window to an as any, and you'd have to convert this application .start to an as any as well, or an as unknown. It really depends on what you want here. We'll just do it as an as any for now. So that would work for your TS, and then in your, And then in your Explorer here, you'd have to rename this one to a .ts. You have to rename this application to a .ts. And then you might still get an error in some places. Let me run a bin/dev. You might still get an error in some places where it tells you it can't find a certain, Let me get rid of this actually. It might tell you it can't find a certain file. And in that case, you'd get an error similar to this one, which says no route matches assets application.js. In that case, you'd have to stop your server and you would have to run a rake assets clobber, which will clear out your pre-built assets. You can then run a bin/dev again. And then you would hopefully have a working file. Now in this case, I don't, I need to get rid of this. This is not right. Let me do this. This needs to be a semicolon right there. There we go. And then I'll get rid of that error. Now in this case, I don't have TS running, but you sort of get the idea here. You could even like take this a step further and generate a stimulus controller if you wanted to. So say Rails G stimulus, create a test controller, and then we can run our bin dev. And then in our test controller, we could do something like let message of type string equal hello world if you wanted to. And then you could do something like, let me rename this to a .ts file so it stops complaining. You can then come in here, say console.log, and then just log out your message, and then come into your page's homepage and do something like a content tag for your div with an empty string, a data, which takes in a controller, and then you'd have something like a controller of test, And then if you refreshed your page, you'd get that hello world message being outputted from your test controller. And then assuming you have your TS check running in the background, if you were to change this to a different type, you would get some kind of error because it's like the wrong type or something. Now in my case, I have a VS Code extension that's probably running that's telling me this, but if you don't, you then have like a error in your console or whatever, I'd imagine. But yeah, that is sort of how to get the Sass running, with the side tangent on how to get TypeScript running, because it was part of the Reddit question. I've just covered the TypeScript section before, so I kind of just tacked it on here. But hopefully this is helpful and covers everything you would need it to cover. And yeah, hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial.